lovely Abigail Magrane. I have been blessed to work with her for the past 4 years. And yeah, it's been 4 years. And we both work for Dominion Energy. And today she's going to kind of go over a little bit about in-house versus outside, a little bit about what an attorney expects of their paralegal/assistant. And she has a couple of interesting cases that she'll kind of go over as well. But with that, let's get moving and let's go.
And I'm pretty informal, as you can tell by my bare legs probably. But if you have any questions, if you don't understand something that I'm in the middle of talking about, if you're curious, just get around me. I'm pretty free-flowing that way. As Leora said, I'm Abby Magrane. I'm one of the attorneys at Dominion Energy, formerly Questar. All of you know as the gas company, I would imagine. A little more than that, but basically that's a lot of what we do. I'm originally from the Chicago area. Grew up outside of Chicago. Went to high school there, went to college in Indiana University. A lot of people here haven't heard about it, frankly. I have a friend whose son's going there, and she said, do people know where Indiana is out here? But it was an amazing college campus. It epitomizes college, in my opinion. It's where breaking, I'm not going to be able to remember it. It was a biking. They do a lot of biking there. They do what's called the Little Indy 500. Anyway, went to law school back in Chicago and promptly moved out here. It is by far the most spontaneous thing I've ever done. I'm not a particularly spontaneous person. I like rules. I like to follow rules. Goes well with being a lawyer. I came out here sight unseen. I had a college roommate who was out here who, when I finished law school, wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Chicago's market was really inundated with lawyers, and so she said, well, I have an extra bedroom, come on out. And the rest, I suppose, as they say, is history. That was, wow, 24 years ago almost. I never looked back, quite frankly. It's beautiful out here, like something I'd never seen. I had a friend in town a couple weeks ago who was remarking on how beautiful, I have a back window that looks east on the Wasatch, and she was remarking how beautiful it is, and I had to sort of stop and remind myself that when I first saw it too, it was remarkable, and now I look at it every day, and anyway. I have 2 kids, 17, 14, very involved in activities. Older one's going to be a senior, younger one's going to start high school in the fall. My extracurricular activities is mostly them. And I'm also a runner. I'm training to run the Chicago Marathon in October, which I've run before. Anyway, let's see, jobs I've had here in Utah. I started at American Stores. Some of you probably aren't even old enough to remember what that was, but it was a grocery conglomerate that had grocery stores all over all over the western United States, some back in Pennsylvania. I stumbled into it off of a temp job, and I met my future boss at American Stores. At the time, I obviously didn't know that, but I was actually acted more as a paralegal, frankly, for a lawyer she was doing mostly HR stuff, equal employment opportunity and things like that. I then moved into criminal law. Criminal law is one way, if any of you are interested in litigation, that's one way to get a ton of litigation experience because you're in court all the time. You're in court for hearings, obviously trials, and the trials are a little fly by the seat of your pants, quite frankly. Criminal law is a much smaller area of the law to sort of get your arms around. Civil law took a little longer, frankly, when I made the move. I then moved, after a couple of years of criminal law, that got old pretty quickly. I moved to a firm called Dunn & Dunn and did insurance defense. Susie Dunn, who was at American Stores, Tim Dunn's, who is now deceased unfortunately, Tim Dunn's wife, was my boss at American Stores. And when I got tired of criminal law, I went to her and said I'd really like to do something else. And I wanted to do something that was still litigation oriented, and insurance defense is very litigation oriented. So I went to work for Dunn & Dunn, and while I was working for Dunn & Dunn, we represented Questar Gas Company in a car accident case where an individual working for the company was trying to hang up, we had radios in the cars, it was pre-cell phone days back in the 90s. Well, I guess they had the big cell phones then. But anyway, he was trying to hang up his phone and the light turned yellow. He was driving a dump truck. And a woman and her 2 children turned left in front of the dump truck and he didn't see them. Broadsided him. The daughter was life-flighted. They had to do jaws of life and life-flighted in the whole thing. And originally we were dealing just with the mother's case because the daughter was still fairly young when I was at Dun and Dun. And we did a mock jury for management at Questar. And it was Tim and I, and Tim took the defense piece and I took the plaintiff's piece, and I'm not a plaintiff's attorney at all. I was born a defense attorney. I'm a little low on sympathy sometimes, but I was pregnant at the time with my son and very emotional. And so I got up and was sort of presenting the case and got emotional and teary-eyed, also very unusual for me, and actually scored a little better than Tim, which was a miracle and never happened again. And the management, the individual who did my job before me, was retiring. And so I was interested in his job, and management was there and saw me perform. And the rest is sort of history. I mean, I gave them an application and filled out, gave them my resume and did all of that. Met with individual who I had worked with, as well as some management, and was hired. And that was 17 years ago next week. Anyway, okay, so that just gives you an idea of who I am. Current job is an in-house job. Like I said, it's the gas company. We have actually lots and lots of other things. We have gas distribution, which is what brings gas to your home. We have gas transmission, which gets the gas from the ground to the distribution company, and then we have gas exploration and production, small amount. As well as, now that we're Dominion, we have electric and nuclear. So went from about 1,500 to 1,700 employees to 17,000, so it's been a bit of a shift. Huge law department back in Richmond, Virginia, which is where they're headquartered, and we are just a little small Western operations out here, which has been, it's been great, but it's been a shift, it's been a difference. Generally what entails when you work in-house, just to give you a flavor. You know your clients. They're a set group because it's the company. You're with them every day. It's a little different than being when you're at a firm or working on your own, frankly. It entails a lot of meetings, entails phone calls, it entails some off-the-cuff advice. We have a wonderful paralegal and a wonderful law clerk who do a lot of our research, so that's nice. And sometimes we use outside attorneys, and so what that looks like for me is I'm sort of the hub of the spokes. So I deal with the outside lawyers and I bring in witnesses and we gather paperwork and evidence and things like that when they're representing us on cases. And largely going to court now is not my deal. I go as a client representative, but I don't, what I like to call, I don't do the dog and pony show anymore. So that's a little different. And it was something actually that I got tired of trial work. Trial work can be really exhausting. It's fantastic, but it can be really exhausting, particularly for paralegals, because you all do all of it and we stand up and talk. So it can be, anyway, I got tired of it, decided to come in-house. It's worked out really, really well. My job now is sort of like insurance defense, but we call it claims. What that means is anytime anything blows up or burns down, I'm the person. I'm on call 24/7, 365. So I get calls in the middle of the night because things tend to blow up and catch on fire at odd hours a lot of times. Fortunately, I haven't had too many explosions, one of which I'm going to talk about that a lot of you may be familiar with. I'm also the safety lawyer, which dovetails nicely with claims. Helps me sort of prevent claims. In other words, I can be on the forefront of helping write policies and making sure that we're disciplining people appropriately when they violate those policies to make sure that we don't have claims down the road. Pipeline safety, which is something that's a huge topic right now in the United States. After the 2010 explosion in San Francisco and San Bruno, where people were killed, that sort of woke Congress up, and they're very confused about what we do generally, and so they are now working towards a lot of new regulations, and so I'm heavily involved in that. Workers' compensation also dovetails with safety nicely. Some HR stuff, some environmental, not my favorite, but that's just my personal opinion. It's very regulatorily intense, which I tend to not be that detailed. And physical security. So anytime we have a theft or we've had some people who have been physically threatened by customers, we've had some employees who've had some issues, so they'll come to me for those kind of questions. Let's see. I already told you how I got a job here. I would say this, that the Griffiths case, the case that I worked on that was the car accident when I did the mock jury, one of the things that I would keep in mind is you never know who your next boss might be. And it just happened that that mock presentation that I did benefited me largely. They saw me actually in action and liked the way I presented things, and it did help me get my next job. And at the time, I wasn't really looking to move. Different than a law firm. Okay, so in-house is often known as better because you have more flexibility and you don't work as many hours. A little bit of a misnomer. Ask her, she was there till 9:30 last night. However, you don't really get involved in all the trials and work weekends and things like that, generally speaking. You also know your clients. For lawyers, you're not rainmaking, but for all of you, you would be able to create relationships. And it's really nice to have a relationship with the clients you work with on a regular basis because it's just easier. They're more inclined to follow my advice. They're easier to get a hold of, those kind of things. A lot of flexibility, like I said, which helps. Ways that it's worse. You know your clients already. So sometimes there can be clients who are difficult and you're stuck with them. So you learn to deal with them and understand their individuality and hopefully help them in the best way possible. Tends to be the same kind of work. Sometimes it can be kind of tedious. My stuff, I like to refer to it as super sexy because fires, explosions, the HR stuff, never boring. Never boring. You think you've heard it? You haven't, I promise. I will not regale you with those stories. Those stories tend to be funny after the fact, frankly, but they're never dull. And neither is claims, frankly. It's similar in the sense that a car accident is a car accident, but each different scenario brings with it a different fact pattern. But it can be tedious. Sometimes it requires more work than necessary at a firm. Like I said, it's a little bit of a misnomer that it's less work. In a lot of ways, particularly for me, because I'm on call. So for me, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. And the clients always know where to find you, which is, again, a good thing, bad thing proposition. Some of my stories, let's see. So some of you may be familiar with the Saratoga Springs explosion, which was a home in Saratoga Springs back in February of 2007. And what had happened was there was a contractor for, CenturyLink now, I think it was Quest or US West at the time, I don't remember, but it was the phone company. And the phone company hired a general who hired a sub who hired a sub to shoot in with a missile, which is a piece of equipment that goes into the ground, under the ground, comes back up, and you can lay, we do it sometimes for pipe, but you can lay phone wire. So this home was brand new. It was when Saratoga was still being built, frankly, and this home was brand new, and they had moved in not too far, a couple months, 2-3 months, and had a temporary phone line that was laying across the ground. And this was Quest's ability to, or time to put in the line. So this sub of a sub came out, and he was using a missile, and he did follow proper procedure. I won't go into all of it because your eyes won't roll back in your head, but he did not follow proper procedure. He also was alone. He did not speak English generally, so it was hard to communicate with the people on the ground when the explosion did happen. He was unable to get a hold of his boss, so there was a whole series of things that happened. And what happened was he hit the gas line. He had no idea what to do. He didn't call the gas company. He tried to call his boss. She was at lunch. He was unable to get a hold of her, and so he didn't do anything for about an hour. Finally got a hold of her, and she knew to call the gas company. We sent a crew out, and the gas was blowing underground, which is, natural gas is lighter than air. I'm going to give you a quick little tutorial, and what that means is it finds the path of least resistance. So if you have a gas leak in your home and you call our company, they will tell you, please go outside, and they will encourage you, if it's safe, to air it out, because gas will find a way to find its way out. Underground, under concrete, under asphalt, in clay. Saratoga Springs is incredibly dense ground, and it was frozen at the time because it was February. The gas is going to move. Unfortunately, one of the least or easiest path with no resistance is a foundation of a home. And so what happened was the gas was blowing so long underground before we were able to get out there, and the process where we have to shut it off is we have to dig up the pipe, it's plastic, dig it up remotely, and then we squeeze it off. That takes a little bit of time. So in the meantime, we believe that the gas was traveling underground and found a conduit, probably a power line, maybe a gopher hole, we're not sure, even though we investigated it extensively. And the gas got into the home. There was a woman at home with her 18-month-old by the name of April Roper. And when our company got there, they were checking the ground for gas, and they went to the door and they knocked on the door and they followed procedure, and our employees said, you need to evacuate, please. And so she bundled up her 18-month-old, went down the street to the neighbors. So Questar Minion went about its business and got the gas shut down. And after some period of time, the foreman instructed an employee to go in and clear the house because the homeowner had come down the street. She had a dinner party to plan, and we're looking at 4 o'clock by now, 4:30. And she was having people over for dinner, and justifiably so, was concerned because she wasn't able to prep for dinner because she was out of her house. So she asked if she could get back in yet. And the gas had been shut down for a period of time. They were just making the final repairs. And so the foreman sent one of our employees to go inside and check. By some, we don't know why, because the only two people who can tell us are now unfortunately deceased, spoiler alert. She went into the house with our employee, which is not appropriate or allowed. We're not sure, again, how it happened. We don't know if she followed him in, we don't know. He had 25 years of experience. I doubt seriously that he said, come on in, but I don't know. Anyway, they went inside. The neighbor was with the 18-month-old and her own 2-year-old out in the driveway waiting, and there was an explosion. And one of our employees was injured on the ground because the house was brick, and the brick pushed out because natural gas goes up and out. Also, just by its nature. So it pushes, when it explodes, it pushes things up and outwards. So the brick wall hit one of our employees who was working in the yard, and the house then comes back down in. So they were both in the basement, and they were both unfortunately killed. To make this story even worse, April Roper's husband was up the street. He's an excavator, and he was up the street digging a foundation for another home and actually heard it and turned around and saw that his house was a pile of rubble, and that still gives me goosebumps. Anyway, so he came rushing over. So that's what happened with Saratoga. It was an incredibly unfortunate case. It was something, I received the phone call, by then it was probably 4:30, 5 o'clock, from our dispatcher who said, we can't find the employee. And I said, well, what do you mean you can't find him? I mean, I had honestly no frame of reference at this point. I'd been here 6 years maybe at that time. I said, what do you mean you can't find him? And she said, well, we think he might still be in the house. I said, what? I said, well, where's his truck? Is his truck still there? And she said, yeah. So I'm trying to can't possibly be. But it was, unfortunately. So we have, to make you all feel a little more comfortable, I hope, changed a lot of policies and procedures as a result. Because there were some things with evacuations. We've elongated the how far you have to be away from the house, how long. We have 2 employees now that go in individually and check, and on and on and on. So that was Saratoga. That was 16, 17 months out of my life. I worked that week about 16, 17-hour days, so sometimes it can be rough. But there were agencies involved. OSHA was involved because we had the deaf employee. Department of Transportation, PHMSA, which handles pipeline safety, involved, so we had those investigators there. We had internal investigators. All of management was there. There were people in the neighborhood who had their lawn chairs out that were watching, which baffles me, frankly. And I had Tim Dunn at that time. I had my outside attorney with me because this was obviously a big case. Another case that I had, I'll keep it a little briefer, a little more brief. We call it the Headless Horse case because there was a pipeline project down in Birdseye. Does anybody know where that is? It's about this big. It's on, I want to say Highway 89, but I'm making that up. It's when you go up. Huh?
State Road 6.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, you go up State Road 6 and then you drop down, and it's very, very small. There was a couple that was driving to work at 5 in the morning. It was pitch black. They were driving in a Suburban. And there was a pipeline project in the area, and a black mare horse got out, and she was in the middle of the road, and she was not visible, apparently. So this couple hit the mare. Unfortunately, the impact, because they were traveling at about 55 miles an hour, caused the horse's head to separate from its body and came in through the windshield into the laps of the husband and wife. Yeah, it was not great. They were both pretty badly injured because it was impact, separate and apart from the accident itself. They were okay though, they're still alive, and their injuries weren't life-threatening, fortunately. And yes, the horse's head was a piece of evidence because they saved it. So that was good. Anyway, it turned out that we were not the ones that let the horse out. So we ended up out of that case, but it was a wild deposition, I will say that. Depositions are fun if you get to attend any. They can be very interesting depending on what you're, I'm fascinated by serial killers as well, so kind of get sort of where I'm coming from. Last case I'll share with you is an individual, one of our employees was called out to gas leak in an apartment in Murray, apartment building. He went, found the leak. It was a leaky pipe behind the stove. It was a tenant. And he went outside to follow procedure and do the outside work, and unfortunately came in contact with our gas line, our service line, which happens about 1 in every, I don't know, lots of thousands of times. So employees will tell you that that can happen in your career. It's very, very rare. What happened was the gas that was escaping out of a very small hole ignited because of friction, because it was trying to push through the grass, and so the hole wasn't very big. And the apartment building caught on fire. Our employee then ran inside. This is a little known fact, and I won't share his name because he didn't want anybody to ever know this at the time. By the way, this was 2008, literally 18 months after Saratoga, so it was a pretty epic 18 months. He ran into the building and got everybody out, except for a parrot. I always feel bad about the parrot, but he was able to get all the humans out and nobody was injured. That was a litigation that lasted for a really long time because there was a lot of questions about whether we should be doing outside work at all. There's a split in the industry. The employee ended up being charged with a crime because the police department believed that he lit the line on fire on purpose so that he could be a hero. There was zero evidence of that, by the way. And we ended up getting those charges dismissed. But that was another pretty interesting case in the sense that it took a turn that I didn't expect it to take. And I had some of that criminal background. We had to hire an attorney separate and apart for our employee because he wasn't, of course, in scope of his employment, and we believed that he had done everything he needed to do. But they ended up getting those charges dismissed, and he actually still works at the company, so he's a great employee. The interview that I had, they wanted him to come back in, and the interview that I had that day with him, he was at the time 24 maybe, just a baby, he hadn't been in the company very long, about 2 years. And they started accusing him, and I remember sitting there and like, you know, and at one point they said, would you be willing to take a lie detector? And I said, oh, we're done here. We're done. We'll be in touch. We got up and we left, and I take him downstairs and I put him in his truck and I call his supervisor and I say to the supervisor, he's gonna take the rest of the day off, you know, we're gonna let this ride. And I get in my car and I'm like, oh, like it freaked me out because I just wasn't prepared for him to be charged like that, and he was just, had no clue. Anyway, so that's some of the stuff that I deal with. I haven't had one of those in a while, so hopefully. Run-of-the-mill stuff, she deals with, which is great. Car accidents and the like. She does a lot of my discovery, a lot of the written responses, a lot of subpoena responses. So she's great that way. Sorry, I had to tell you just a little. Interacting with clients. One of the things that I make sure I do is always ready to help. And one of the things I learned early on in my career is don't really tell a client, no, you can't do that. You have to make sure that, you know, you have to make sure that it's within the bounds of the law, but we like to find solutions rather than telling people no. And that's been pretty beneficial. Of course, sometimes there's, wow, I don't see any way we can do that, but for the most part, we try to find a solution. We have a saying at Dominion in the legal department, which is prevent or defend, paycheck's all the same. So we're happy to help you avoid an incident by giving advice and helping you through a situation, with a claim or what have you. We are just as happy, particularly me, because I'm a litigator at heart, just as happy to defend it. So when people say I'm going to have my lawyer, blah, 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 that would be fantastic. Please have him or her call me. Because, you know, sometimes it's worth it. And I refer to it as dropping the leash, my leash, because oftentimes they're trying to hold me back from fighting. But I'm always ready for a fight, and I'm always excited when the client drops the leash and says, yeah, go for it. We have a small little case right now, about $2,000 in damages that we don't want to pay. And so they filed in district court, and we're fighting about it. And it's going to be way more than $2,000 to defend it, but it is the principle of the thing. And so sometimes we have those, which is fantastic. Okay, expectations of my assistants, including my paralegal. So for a while, Leora was jack of all trades, because we were down a secretary for actually quite a while. And my boss at the time approached me and said, how would you like to have Leora as your paralegal and your assistant? I was like, hey, hallelujah. Yes, that would be great. So for a while, she was doing both. We now have a legal assistant back in the legal department, which is great. They work great as a team, but so my expectations are kind of the same, other than they have different responsibilities. I will say this, each attorney will have their own style and their own needs, wants. We're a very unique group, no two of us are alike. Particularly at Dominion, we have 4 very different personalities in the legal department, I think. I would ask, what are your expectations of me? What is it that I can do to help you? Do you want, you know, how much in advance, if you draft a pleading, for example, how much in advance would you like that? If you're helping write a contract, you know, when do you need to review that? Do you need to review it? All those kind of things. And you get a sense of it, but I think it helps to ask, because we'll all be different. I'm pretty direct, straightforward, if you can't tell. Pretty clear about what I want and what I don't want. Some are not. Some will be harder to figure out. So asking is a really good idea. What I like, have initiative. Think of things before I do. So there'll be an email that'll come in to both Leora and I. For example, in the morning. I'm not a morning person. I do not get there early. Again, lawyers will be different, although we tend to be later as a group than earlier, but there are some that are there early. And I'll get to my office, and before I have a chance to say to her, hey, will you pull the file and whatever, it's on my desk. Those kind of things, when you get to know your lawyer or lawyers, those are the kind of things you can take initiative on. And, you know, pull the stuff before it gets asked, because you know what the question's going to be. I mean, she knows me pretty well by now. Be available, obviously within reason. You know, we don't expect you guys to be chained to your desks, but, you know, be available. Understand that we tend to be a bit impatient as a group. We're pretty, and we suck at math, if you haven't heard that before. Be responsive, return calls, return emails. You know, in our case, I mean, in most cases, you're in the same kind of office. go see the lawyer, just make sure that, that you're responsive and that things don't languish when you get asked for something, when, you need to put something together, when you need to, pull some information, just make sure that you're responsive. Again, within reason. I mean, there are some unreasonable attorneys, but most are within reason. Be organized, because I rely on her. We just laughed because I was standing at her desk and there's a pile of my stuff that needs to be filed. And I go, I should take a picture of this for my Be Organized piece. But what she said to me, and this is true, she said I could probably find anything you needed in that pile, which is true. And my rule, and this is not all lawyers, but my rule is, I don't care where you put it, just be able to find it. That's how I feel about it, because I don't want to have to look for it myself. Sometimes I do, but have to, not want to. But be able to find it. So, and figure out different lawyers like things filed differently. If any of you go into trial work, the trial binder is a perfect example. When the trial is going on, the best way for a paralegal to assist is, I need this exhibit. And even as I'm talking, and so blah, 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 and you will know what's coming and you will hand it to me so that I'm not flipping through trial binders and I'm not pulling files out and papers are going everywhere. The best way for that to flow, if you go into litigation, is to make sure you know where everything is, be able to find it and be able to hand it off so it's pretty seamless, so that a jury or a judge is not distracted by papers flipping and waiting and the witness is waiting and and be a mind reader. So that's there are times where I expect my assistants to be mind readers, and they're actually both really good, but they all both know me pretty well. If you get into a situation where you don't know what to do, you've been given a directive, you're working on something, you get to a point either right out of the chute or in the middle of it, and you're really not sure what direction it's supposed to go, ask. I have had situations, not currently, where assistants have thought what they were doing was what I wanted, and then we get to the end of it and it's not what I wanted, and then it's this awkward conversation about, so you have to go back and redo it. It will save you work in the end. So don't be afraid. Like I said, some lawyers are less approachable than others. But don't be afraid to ask questions. This is what I've got so far, or I misunderstood, or whatever, because it's far weirder to have to go back and redo it. And that's about it, and I talked really fast. What questions do you have, if any? Anything? Know anything? I know nothing.
Why did Dominion change their name?
What?
Why did they change their name?
Because we were purchased by Dominion back east, and Dominion underwent an entire rebranding, and they are in, I don't even know last count, 15 states, but all West Virginia, Virginia, Ohio, North Carolina, South Carolina, now Utah, Idaho, Wyoming. And instead of having all the different names, Dominion Energy, Questar Corporation, what they did was Dominion Energy Utah, Dominion Energy Wyoming, Dominion Energy Virginia. So they went through a whole rebranding. Even we got the D, I don't know if you've seen the blue D that's on the Questar building now. But we got a new D, which is a big deal, apparently. Anyway, so they went through this whole rebranding, and that's why. We here in Utah were reluctant somewhat to change the name because